The courtroom fell into stunned silence. All eyes were fixed on the young black teenager standing confidently before the judge. Despite the scorn and ridicule thrown her way just moments earlier, she remained composed, her calm demeanor in stark contrast to the tension in the room. Judge Patterson, known for his sharp tongue and condescending attitude, had spent the last 20 minutes belittling her, mocking her audacity to represent herself in such a serious case. "You think you can fool this court?" he sneered, his laughter echoing through the chamber. "A child playing dress-up as an attorney. This is a courtroom, young lady, not a school play." But when she finally spoke, her voice was steady and precise. With each word, she dismantled the prosecution's arguments, citing legal precedents with razor-sharp precision. The judge, the lawyers, and the entire audience watched in disbelief as she exposed flaws in the case with the skill of a seasoned attorney. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It was clear she was no ordinary defendant. "I object," one of the prosecutors blurted out, his frustration visible. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe this. This individual is not who she claims to be." The teenager met his glare with unwavering confidence and offered a faint smile. "Your Honor, I can provide my credentials if necessary," she said. "But I assure you, every argument I've made is legally sound. Shall we proceed?" Judge Patterson's smug expression had vanished, replaced by growing unease. His face flushed as he leaned forward. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice laced with disbelief. Without hesitation, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a pristine document, handing it to the bailiff. The paper made its way to the judge, and as he read it, his hands trembled. His mouth opened, then closed, as if struggling to find words. The courtroom remained silent, anticipation thick in the air. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The story began in the quiet suburbs of Chicago, where 17-year-old Maya Brooks lived with her grandmother, Clara. Maya was no ordinary teenager. A child prodigy, she had devoured law books for fun by the age of 7 and debated college students by 12. Yet, despite her brilliance, Maya preferred to keep a low profile, uninterested in the spotlight her intellect could command. Her grandmother, a retired school teacher, often reminded her of the importance of humility and using her gifts to help others. One afternoon, while helping Clara with groceries, Maya overheard a heated conversation at the corner store. A local single mother, Teresa, stood at the counter in tears, pleading with the cashier. "I don't have anywhere to go," she sobbed. "I've paid every cent on time, but he says I violated the lease. I didn't. I swear I didn't." Maya's heart sank as she watched the scene unfold. After the conversation ended, she approached Teresa outside the store. "What happened?" she asked gently. Teresa wiped her eyes and explained through halting breaths. Her landlord was evicting her, claiming she had too many people living in the apartment. "It's just me and my babies," Teresa insisted. "He's lying because he wants to raise the rent for someone else." Maya's mind raced. "Do you have copies of your payments and the lease agreement?" she asked. Teresa nodded. "I keep everything in a folder at home." A spark of determination lit up Maya's face. "Let me help you," she said firmly. Teresa blinked in disbelief. "But you're just a kid." Maya smiled. "I've been told that before. Trust me." Over the next few days, Maya pored over Teresa's documents. The landlord's claims were riddled with inconsistencies, and Maya saw a clear path forward. She drafted a formal letter to the landlord, demanding he cease the eviction and warning of legal action if he failed to comply. When the landlord ignored the letter, Maya helped Teresa file a case in small claims court. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. The teenager with her nose always buried in books was standing up for justice. Local reporters caught wind of the story, and soon, Maya's involvement made headlines in every small-town news outlet. But not everyone was impressed. Some questioned her qualifications, while others mocked the idea of a teenager tackling such a serious matter. As the court date approached, Teresa grew increasingly anxious. "What if we lose?" she fretted. "I can't afford a lawyer." Maya reassured her with a calm exterior, but deep down, she knew the stakes were high. This wasn't just about Teresa. It was about standing up to injustice and proving that neither age nor appearance defined one's capability. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Spectators, reporters, and even a few lawyers packed the benches to see the so-called child attorney in action. Dressed in a simple navy blazer and skirt, Maya carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied her age. As she stepped forward to speak, Judge Patterson interrupted her, his tone dripping with condescension. "And who are you supposed to be?" Maya met his gaze, unfazed. "I'm representing the plaintiff, Your Honor," she replied evenly. The judge chuckled, shaking his head. "You must be joking. Is this some kind of prank?" The room erupted with whispers and stifled laughter, but Maya remained composed, her expression unchanging. Judge Patterson continued his ridicule, questioning her credibility and lamenting the audacity of kids these days. Maya endured the barrage silently, waiting for her moment. When the floor was finally hers, she presented her case with precision and clarity. She cited legal precedents and systematically dismantled the landlord's claims, exposing the lies woven into his arguments. The room grew still as she spoke, her words commanding respect. But the moment that left the courtroom speechless was when Maya revealed her secret. "Your Honor, I am Maya Brooks, a certified legal prodigy. I passed the bar exam at 16. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs as Judge Patterson slammed his gavel, calling for order. His face paled as Maya's words sank in. "This court is adjourned for a 10-minute recess," he stammered, retreating to his chambers. Maya sat back at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly. Despite her composed exterior, her heart pounded in her chest. She had taken a bold risk revealing her credentials, and now there was no turning back. Teresa leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maya, are you sure we're going to win this? They're acting like you're some kind of fraud." Maya turned to her, her voice steady. "They're acting that way because they're afraid. The truth is on our side, Teresa. Trust me." Before Teresa could respond, the bailiff announced the judge's return. The room fell silent as Judge Patterson re-entered. His expression was unreadable, but the arrogance from earlier had vanished. "This court will now resume," he said, his voice firm. His gaze shifted to Maya, but this time, there was no mockery in his eyes. "Miss Brooks, the court acknowledges your credentials. You may proceed," Judge Patterson said, his tone measured but stern. "However, I advise you to tread carefully. You are still representing your client in a very serious matter." Maya rose and walked to the front of the courtroom, her movements deliberate and composed. She could feel the weight of the stairs behind her, the skepticism palpable, but she blocked it out, focusing solely on the task at hand. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I would like to submit additional evidence that further undermines the defense's claims." She approached the bench and handed Judge Patterson a neatly organized stack of documents, copies of emails exchanged between Teresa and the landlord. Each email was meticulously highlighted in bright yellow, drawing attention to the landlord's contradictory statements about supposed lease violations. The judge studied the documents in silence, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When he finally looked up, his gaze shifted to the landlord's attorney. "Mr. Cole," the judge said sharply, "these emails directly contradict your client's testimony. Do you have an explanation for this?" The landlord's attorney, a middle-aged man with graying hair, hesitated, visibly flustered. "Your Honor, these emails could have been fabricated. We would need time to verify their authenticity." Maya didn't flinch. "Your Honor, I anticipated that argument," she said, pulling out another document. "Here is the chain of custody for these emails, including metadata verification from a certified digital forensics expert." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Patterson's gavel slammed down hard. "Order. I said order." Maya returned to her seat, her confidence unshaken. Judge Patterson turned back to Mr. Cole, his tone icy. "Unless you can provide concrete evidence to refute this, I will have no choice but to consider these emails valid." The defense attorney stumbled over his words, visibly caught off guard. "Your Honor, we need additional time to review." "Denied," the judge interrupted. "We've already spent enough time on this matter. Miss Brooks, continue." Maya stood again, her voice unwavering as she laid out the timeline of events. She connected the landlord's actions to clear violations of housing laws, citing precedent after precedent to reinforce Teresa's case. Her arguments grew more persuasive with each passing minute. At one point, the landlord himself, a burly man with a sour expression, leaned over to whisper furiously to his attorney. Maya noticed but didn't let it distract her. She pressed on, determined to deliver her final points with precision. Then, something unexpected happened. As Maya summarized her closing arguments, the landlord abruptly stood, his face red with anger. "She's lying," he shouted, pointing directly at Maya. "This whole thing is a setup. There's no way a kid like her knows all this legal stuff." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Judge Patterson slammed his gavel repeatedly, his voice booming over the noise. "Order in the court. Sit down, Mr. Reynolds, or I will hold you in contempt." The landlord reluctantly sat, his chest heaving with fury. Maya took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "if Mr. Reynolds has any evidence to support his accusations, I invite him to present it. Otherwise, I request that the court focus on the facts." Judge Patterson nodded, his expression stern. "Mr. Reynolds, you will remain silent unless called upon to speak." "Miss Brooks, you may continue." Maya concluded her presentation, her closing remarks delivered with the precision and authority of a seasoned attorney. When she finally sat down, a wave of relief washed over her, but she knew the battle wasn't over yet. The defense attorney called his next witness, a maintenance worker from the apartment complex who claimed to have seen multiple people entering and leaving Teresa's unit. Maya listened carefully, jotting down notes as the man testified. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she approached the witness stand with calm, measured steps. "Mr. Davis," she began, her tone polite but firm, "you testified that you saw multiple people entering and leaving Ms. Carter's apartment. Can you specify how many people and when this occurred?" The man hesitated. Maybe 4 or 5 people. And it was a couple of months ago." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "A couple of months ago. Do you remember the exact dates?" "No, not exactly," he admitted. "Did you report this to anyone at the time?" "Well, no," the man said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "It didn't seem like a big deal then." Maya's lips curved into a faint smile. "So, to clarify, you're unable to provide specific dates or evidence to support your claim. Is that correct?" The man frowned but nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, I guess so." "Thank you, Mr. Davis," Maya said, stepping away from the stand. As she returned to her seat, she glanced at Teresa, who gave her a nervous but grateful smile. The rest of the day's proceedings were relatively uneventful compared to the earlier drama, but tension hung thick in the air as the court adjourned for the day. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Maya and Teresa, shouting questions and snapping photos. Maya shielded Teresa as best she could, guiding her through the crowd. Back at home, Maya collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Clara placed a cup of tea in front of her and sat down beside her. "You were incredible today," her grandmother said softly, pride shining in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you." Maya managed a tired smile. "Thanks, Grandma. But it's not over yet. Tomorrow is going to be even tougher." Clara reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "You've got this, Maya. Just remember why you're doing it." Maya nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "For people like Teresa. For everyone who's ever been told they're not enough." The next morning, Maya arrived at the courthouse early, her nerves steeled for the challenges ahead. But as she walked through the courthouse doors, a sight stopped her in her tracks. 2 police officers speaking with the landlord, Mr. Reynolds. One of the officers glanced in Maya's direction, then began walking toward her, his expression grim. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone firm. "We need to talk." Maya froze for a moment, her mind racing as she scanned his face, searching for clues about the nature of the confrontation. Teresa, who had been a few steps behind, caught up to her and immediately sensed the tension. "Is there a problem, officer?" Maya asked, her voice calm and steady. The officer glanced at Mr. Reynolds, who stood a short distance away, his face twisted into a smug grin. "We've received a report from Mr. Reynolds," the officer said. He's alleging that you falsified evidence in this case. Teresa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Maya's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. That's a serious accusation, she replied evenly. What evidence does he have to support it? The officer shifted uncomfortably. We're not here to determine that. We're just doing our due diligence. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. The landlord's smirk grew wider, his confidence oozing from across the lobby. Maya met his gaze, her expression unflinching. I understand, she said to the officer, her voice steady. But I'd like to speak with my client and legal counsel before I go anywhere. The officer hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Don't take too long. Maya turned to Teresa, lowering her voice. This is a scare tactic. He's trying to rattle us because he knows his case is falling apart. But what if they arrest you? Teresa whispered, her panic barely contained. What if? They won't, Maya said firmly. I've done nothing wrong, and they have no proof otherwise. Stay calm, and don't say anything to the landlord or his attorney. Teresa nodded reluctantly, her fear still evident. Stepping aside, Maya pulled out her phone and called her grandmother. Clara answered on the first ring. Maya, is everything okay? Grandma, I need you to contact Mr. Harris, Maya said, referring to a trusted family friend and retired attorney. The landlord just made a false accusation against me, and the police want to question me. Clara's voice hardened. Stay strong, sweetheart. I'll get in touch with him right away. Don't let them intimidate you. I won't, Maya promised before ending the call. She turned back to the officer, who stood waiting nearby. I'm ready, she said, but I want to make it clear that I've done nothing illegal. This is a desperate attempt to intimidate me. The officer gave a small nod, but didn't respond as they headed for the station. Maya walked with her head held high, refusing to give the landlord the satisfaction of seeing her falter. At the police station, she was escorted to a small interrogation room. It was sparse, with only a metal table and 2 chairs. One of the officers sat across from her, placing a tape recorder on the table. Miss Brooks, the officer began, his tone neutral. You're not under arrest, but we need to ask you some questions about the evidence you submitted in court. Mr. Reynolds claims it was fabricated. Maya clasped her hands on the table, her expression calm and resolute. The evidence I submitted is authentic, she said. I have documentation to prove its validity, including a chain of custody report from a certified digital forensics expert. The officer frowned slightly. Do you have those documents with you? They're in my case file, which is back in the courtroom, Maya replied. You're welcome to review them. The officer hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. Why would Mr. Reynolds make these accusations if they weren't true? Because he's desperate, Maya said bluntly. His case is falling apart, and he knows it. This is his way of trying to discredit me and delay the proceedings. The officer studied her for a moment, then stood. Wait here. As the door closed behind him, Maya exhaled slowly, allowing herself a brief moment of doubt. What if this derailed the case? What if they believe the landlord's lies? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. The officer returned, followed by Mr. Harris. The retired attorney's sharp eyes met hers, and he gave her a reassuring nod before addressing the officer. I'm here as Miss Brooks' legal counsel, Mr. Harris said, his tone measured but firm. What exactly is the basis for this questioning? The officer explained the landlord's accusations, but as Mr. Harris listened, his expression didn't waver. When the officer finished, Mr. Harris leaned forward, his voice steady and commanding. This is a baseless claim, he said. If Mr. Reynolds has evidence to support these allegations, let him present it. Otherwise, you're detaining my client without cause. The officer shifted uncomfortably. We're not detaining her. Then she's free to go, Mr. Harris interrupted. Unless you're planning to arrest her, this conversation is over. The officer hesitated, but finally nodded. She's free to go. But we'll be following up on this. Maya stood, her confidence returning. I'll be happy to cooperate within the bounds of the law, she said calmly. As they left the station, Mr. Harris placed a hand on her shoulder. You handled yourself well, he said. But be careful. This landlord is playing dirty. Maya nodded, her determination unwavering. I expected as much. Thank you for coming. Anytime, Mr. Harris replied with a small smile. When Maya returned to the courthouse, Teresa rushed to her, relief evident on her face. Are you okay? What happened? They let me go, Maya said, her voice steady. They didn't have anything to hold me on. Teresa exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly, though her worry remained. What do we do now? We stick to the plan, Maya replied firmly. This is just another obstacle. We'll get through it. The hearing resumed that afternoon, but the atmosphere in the courtroom was markedly different. The landlord sat at his table, smug and confident, clearly believing the morning's ordeal had shaken Maya. Yet, as she rose to present her arguments, it was as though nothing had happened. Maya methodically dismantled the landlord's remaining defenses, presenting compelling evidence and calling witnesses who testified to his history of exploiting tenants. With each passing moment, the tension in the room thickened, and the landlord's once confident demeanor began to crack. By the end of the day, Maya felt they were gaining ground. But just as she allowed herself a glimmer of hope, another twist threatened to upend everything. As the court prepared to adjourn, the landlord's attorney, Mr. Cole, stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, we've just received new evidence that we believe will change the course of this case. We request an emergency motion to introduce it tomorrow. Judge Patterson frowned. What kind of evidence? Mr. Cole hesitated, clearly trying to dramatize the moment. Financial records that suggest Miss Carter has been withholding information about her income. A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Maya's heart sank as she turned to Teresa, who looked utterly bewildered. Judge Patterson banged his gavel for silence. We'll review the motion tomorrow, he declared. Court is adjourned for the day. As Maya packed up her files, the sinking feeling in her chest deepened. If the landlord's team had fabricated evidence, it could derail everything. She glanced at Teresa, who was pale and trembling. I don't understand, Teresa whispered. What financial records? I don't have anything to hide. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't worry. We'll figure it out. But as they walked out of the courthouse, Maya couldn't shake the sense that the battle was about to become even more treacherous, and this time, the stakes felt higher than ever. That night, Maya sat at her desk, the faint glow of her laptop illuminating the room. She combed through every document, email, and note related to the case. The landlord's team was pulling every trick in the book, but she needed to stay one step ahead. The mention of financial records didn't make sense. Teresa had been completely transparent about her income, and Maya had reviewed her bank statements herself. The alleged records had to be fabricated, but proving that would require precision and vigilance. As Maya typed out possible arguments and strategies, Clara poked her head into the room. Her expression was soft with concern. You need rest, sweetheart, Clara said gently. You can't fight this battle if you're running on fumes. I know, Grandma, Maya replied without looking up, but I need to figure out what they're planning. I can't let them blindside us tomorrow. Clara walked in and placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. You've done everything you can tonight. Trust yourself, and trust that the truth will come out. Maya sighed, nodding reluctantly. You're right, she said, shutting her laptop. I'll get some sleep. But as she lay in bed, her mind refused to quiet. What kind of evidence could they possibly have? And how far were they willing to go to discredit Teresa? The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the landlord's last-minute motion, and anticipation buzzed in the air. Maya and Teresa sat at the plaintiff's table, both trying to project calm despite the storm brewing around them. Judge Patterson entered, his expression as stern as ever. This court is now in session, he announced. Mr. Cole, you may proceed with your motion. Mr. Cole stood and approached the bench, carrying a thick folder. Your Honor, these are financial records that suggest Miss Carter has been receiving income from undisclosed sources. We believe this information is relevant to the case, as it pertains to her ability to pay rent and the claims of financial hardship she has made. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Patterson flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. Miss Brooks, the judge said, looking up, have you had an opportunity to review this evidence? Maya stood. No, Your Honor. This is the first time I'm seeing it. I request time to review these documents and verify their authenticity. Mr. Cole immediately objected. Your Honor, the evidence is straightforward and should be admitted immediately. Any delay would unfairly disadvantage my client. Maya stepped forward, her tone resolute. Your Honor, this evidence was presented at the 11th hour with no prior notice. Given the seriousness of these allegations, it's only fair that we be allowed time to examine it thoroughly. Judge Patterson considered this for a moment before nodding. Miss Brooks is correct. The plaintiff will have until tomorrow morning to review this evidence. Court is adjourned for the day. As soon as the hearing ended, Maya and Teresa hurried to a quiet corner of the courthouse to review the documents. Maya's heart sank as she flipped through the pages. The records included bank statements and payment logs that seemed to suggest Teresa had been receiving income from unknown sources. Teresa stared at the documents, her hands trembling. Large sums of money? From where? Her voice cracked with fear. I've never seen these before. They're not mine. Maya studied the papers intently, her analytical mind racing. Something felt off. The records appeared official, but there was a faint whiff of deception she couldn't ignore. These look polished, Maya muttered, but I'm not convinced. Let me dig deeper. She pulled out her laptop and began cross-referencing the account numbers and transaction details, her fingers flying across the keyboard. After an hour of painstaking research, Maya's sharp eyes caught something. Look at this, she said, turning the screen toward Teresa. The account these payments are coming from belongs to a company called Harmony Solutions. Have you ever heard of them? Teresa shook her head, her expression clouded with confusion. No. What do they even do? Maya's brow furrowed as she typed furiously. I'm not sure yet, but I'll find out. Her search revealed troubling details. Harmony Solutions was a shell company. Its listed address was a P.O. box in a faraway state, and its website was just a single page of vague descriptions about consulting services. This is a front, Maya said, her tone sharpening. It's too flimsy to be real. Teresa, this could be our smoking gun. If we can link Harmony Solutions to Mr. Reynolds, we can prove these records were fabricated. Teresa looked hopeful for a brief moment, but it quickly faded. How? How can we prove that? Maya leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning with possibilities. We'll need help. I know someone who might be able to get us what we need. That evening, Maya met Aaron, a tech-savvy friend from her neighborhood who had a knack for digging up digital breadcrumbs. Aaron was a college student majoring in cybersecurity and always up for a challenge. Fabricated financial records? Aaron asked, raising an eyebrow as Maya handed him the documents. That's shady. But if there's a digital trail, I'll find it. Maya explained everything she'd uncovered so far while Aaron's fingers flew across his keyboard. The room was silent except for the soft tapping of keys as he delved into Harmony Solutions. After an hour, he leaned back with a triumphant grin. Got it, Aaron said, spinning his laptop around. Harmony Solutions is registered under a holding company owned by, wait for it, your landlord, Mr. Reynolds. Maya's jaw tightened as she leaned closer. So he's behind this, she muttered. He created fake records to frame Teresa. Looks like it, Aaron confirmed. And I've got the digital breadcrumbs to prove it. These transactions were fabricated using template software. Amateur move. Maya felt a weight lift off her chest, replaced by a flicker of satisfaction. Aaron, you're a lifesaver. Just doing my part, Aaron replied with a shrug. I'll send you everything you need. But be careful. Guys like this don't play fair. The next morning, Maya walked into the courtroom with renewed determination. She had spent the night organizing Aaron's findings into a comprehensive presentation, and she was ready to dismantle the landlord's scheme. When the hearing resumed, Mr. Cole confidently presented the financial records, reiterating his claim that Teresa had been hiding income. Judge Patterson turned to Maya. Miss Brooks, are you ready to respond? Maya stood, her voice steady and firm. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to present evidence that these financial records are fraudulent and were fabricated by Mr. Reynolds to discredit my client. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Maya walked to the front. Calmly but methodically, she laid out her findings. She explained the connection between Harmony Solutions and Mr. Reynolds, detailing how the company was used to create fake transactions. Maya handed over copies of Aaron's evidence, including screenshots, metadata, and a step-by-step breakdown of the forgery process. As she spoke, the landlord's smug expression crumbled. He leaned over to whisper furiously to Mr. Cole, who looked pale and visibly flustered. When Maya finished, Judge Patterson reviewed the documents, his expression darkening. Finally, he turned to the landlord. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge said sternly, "do you have any explanation for this?" The landlord stammered, his face flushing red. I didn't do anything. This is a setup." The judge's voice turned icy. "The evidence says otherwise. I am deeply disturbed by these actions, which appear to be an attempt to manipulate this court. I will be referring this matter for further investigation." Maya returned to her seat, her heart pounding. She had won this round, but she knew the battle wasn't over. As the judge adjourned for the day, Teresa turned to Maya, her eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. But just as they began packing up their things, Mr. Cole stood and made an announcement that sent a chill through the room. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but dripping with malice, "in light of these allegations, my client intends to countersue for defamation. We'll be filing the paperwork immediately." The announcement hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. A countersuit? Maya's mind raced. She knew this was another ploy to intimidate and exhaust Teresa into submission, but it added a new layer of complexity to an already grueling fight. Judge Patterson raised a skeptical brow at Mr. Cole. "You intend to countersue for defamation after being implicated in the fabrication of evidence?" He exhaled sharply. "This court will require compelling proof to even entertain such a claim." Mr. Cole straightened his tie, his expression smug. "Your Honor, we'll provide that proof. The accusations against my client are baseless, and we believe this case has unfairly damaged his reputation." The judge's displeasure was evident as he raised his gavel. "You may file your motion, but be advised, this court will not tolerate frivolous litigation. Proceed at your own risk." The gavel struck, adjourning the session for the day as the courtroom emptied. Maya remained seated, her thoughts churning as the courtroom emptied. Beside her, Teresa sat frozen, visibly shaken. "Maya," Teresa whispered, her voice trembling. "What does this mean? Can he really do this?" Maya turned to her, her eyes filled with determination. "He's bluffing, Teresa. He knows his case is weak, so he's trying to scare us into backing down. But we're not going anywhere." That evening, Maya gathered her team, Teresa, Clara, and Aaron, for an emergency strategy session at her home. The aroma of Clara's tea filled the cozy living room, offering a moment of warmth amidst the tension. "This countersuit is a distraction," Maya began, spreading papers and notes across the coffee table. "But we can't ignore it. If we let it gain traction, it could muddy the waters and make it harder for the judge to see the truth." Aaron leaned forward, his laptop balanced on his knees. "I've been digging into Reynolds' financial records. The guy's got skeletons in his closet. Maya, I found transactions tied to other shell companies. Looks like he's been using them to dodge taxes and funnel money." Clara's eyes widened. "That's serious. Could it help your case?" "It could," Maya said, nodding. "But we need to tread carefully. If we bring this up, we'll need solid proof and a clear strategy to tie it back to the case." Teresa sank back into the couch, her shoulders sagging. "This is too much. I never wanted any of this, Maya. I just wanted to protect my kids and keep our home." Maya reached over and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know, Teresa, and that's exactly what we're going to do. No matter how dirty they play, we're not backing down." The next day, Maya walked into the courtroom braced for another battle. As promised, Mr. Cole had filed the countersuit, claiming Teresa's accusations had caused Mr. Reynolds severe emotional distress and irreparable harm to his reputation. Judge Patterson reviewed the motion with a skeptical eye. "Mr. Cole," he said, "your motion makes bold claims. Do you have evidence to support these allegations?" Mr. Cole nodded, his expression smug. "Yes, Your Honor. We intend to call witnesses who can testify to the damage these baseless accusations have caused my client." Maya stood. "Your Honor, We believe this countersuit is a ploy to distract from Mr. Reynolds' misconduct. We request the opportunity to depose Mr. Reynolds and his witnesses before the motion proceeds further. The judge considered her request. Very well. Depositions will be scheduled before we move forward. Court is adjourned. A week later, Maya sat in a small conference room, facing Mr. Reynolds and his attorney. The air was thick with tension. Mr. Cole's attempts to deflect questions were transparent, but Maya was relentless. Mr. Reynolds, Maya began, her tone sharp. Can you explain why payments from Harmony Solutions are tied to your personal bank account? Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's none of your business. It's directly relevant to this case, Maya pressed. Harmony Solutions fabricated financial records to frame my client. Are you denying your connection to this company? Reynolds glared at her, his composure cracking. I don't have to answer that. Maya leaned forward, her voice calm but unyielding. You do if you want this court to believe your countersuit has merit. Reynolds' attorney quickly interrupted. Objection. These questions are irrelevant to the countersuit. Maya turned to him, unwavering. They're entirely relevant given the allegations against my client. If Mr. Reynolds wants to claim defamation, then let's discuss the damage caused by his false accusations. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Reynolds' attorney shifted uncomfortably, but the cracks in their case were beginning to show. As the days passed, Aaron uncovered even more damning evidence. Harmony Solutions wasn't the only shell company Reynolds controlled. Several others were linked to fraudulent schemes targeting low-income tenants. Armed with this information, Maya prepared her presentation, though the mounting pressure was undeniable. Reporters hounded Maya, twisting the story into sensational headlines. Social media buzzed with debates, and Maya became a lightning rod for both admiration and criticism. One evening, as she worked late in her grandmother's living room, Clara sat beside her with a comforting presence. You're carrying so much on your shoulders, Maya, Clara said softly. You don't have to do this alone. Maya sighed, her exhaustion showing. I just want to do what's right, Grandma. But sometimes, it feels like the whole world is against us. Clara smiled gently, her voice full of warmth. The truth has a way of shining through, no matter how dark things seem. Just keep going, one step at a time. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. Maya presented her findings with precision, tying Mr. Reynolds' web of shell companies to a pattern of fraud and abuse. She detailed how he had used these schemes to intimidate tenants and silence critics. Judge Patterson listened intently, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Maya finished, the courtroom was silent. Mr. Cole, the judge said, turning to the landlord's attorney, do you have any response to these allegations? Cole stammered, visibly caught off guard. Your Honor, we believe these claims are unrelated to the countersuit. The judge's voice hardened. Unrelated? They speak directly to your client's credibility and pattern of behavior. This court will not proceed with the countersuit until these allegations are fully investigated. Maya felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. As the judge prepared to adjourn, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. Two men in suits entered, flashing badges. Your Honor, one said, we're federal investigators. We've been conducting an investigation into Mr. Reynolds, and we have a warrant for his arrest. Gasps filled the room as the officers approached Reynolds. His face turned pale. This is a mistake, Reynolds shouted as they handcuffed him. You can't do this. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Reynolds was led away, his protests drowned out by the crowd. Maya watched, her heart pounding. This was a victory, but deep down, she knew the fight wasn't over yet. Maya sat frozen in her seat, her mind racing. The landlord's arrest had been unexpected, a dramatic twist she hadn't fully anticipated. It was a major development, but she knew it wouldn't necessarily mean the end of the battle. Judge Patterson banged his gavel, silencing the murmurs that had erupted in the courtroom. This court will reconvene tomorrow to determine how to proceed, he announced before adjourning the session. As the courtroom emptied, Teresa turned to Maya, her voice trembling. Does this mean it's over? Is he going to jail? Maya shook her head, her expression thoughtful but firm. It's a big development, but it doesn't automatically end the case. We need to see how this plays out. Later that evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table with Aaron and Clara, the day's events still replaying in her mind. Aaron's laptop glowed in the dim light as he scrolled through news articles about Reynolds' arrest. "Looks like the feds have been investigating him for years," Aaron said, scanning the screen. "Tax fraud, wire fraud, tenant exploitation, you name it. This guy's been running schemes all over the state." Clara leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. It's no wonder he was so desperate to silence Teresa. Exposing this case must have tipped the scales for the investigators. Maya nodded, her brow furrowed. "We need to be ready for tomorrow. Reynolds might be out of the picture for now, but his attorney will likely try to keep the countersuit alive." Aaron frowned. "Even without Reynolds, they're still going to fight?" "Possibly," Maya replied. "But the judge knows the truth is on our side. We just have to stay ahead of them." The next morning, the courtroom had an unusual hush. The absence of Mr. Reynolds loomed heavily over the room, but his attorney, Mr. Cole, was present, looking more haggard than ever. Maya and Teresa took their seats, bracing for what lay ahead. Judge Patterson entered, his expression stern. "Before we proceed, I want to address the recent developments," he began. "The arrest of Mr. Reynolds raises serious questions about the integrity of this case and the countersuit. However, this court still has a duty to evaluate all evidence before reaching a decision." Mr. Cole stood, his voice unsteady. "Your Honor, while my client is currently unavailable, I believe the countersuit should proceed based on the merits of our claims." Maya stood in response, her tone measured yet firm. "Your Honor, the countersuit has no merit. The fabricated evidence, Mr. Reynolds' arrest, and his established history of misconduct undermine any credibility the defense might claim." Judge Patterson nodded thoughtfully. "Miss Brooks makes a strong argument. However, I will allow the defense to present their case before issuing a ruling." "Mr. Cole, you may proceed." Mr. Cole called his first witness, a tenant from another property owned by Mr. Reynolds. The man testified that Reynolds had always been kind and fair, insisting the accusations were misunderstandings. Maya listened carefully, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she approached the stand with quiet confidence. "Mr. Davis," Maya began, her voice clear, "you've testified that Mr. Reynolds was a fair landlord. Can you confirm whether you've ever had any disputes with him?" The man hesitated, his discomfort evident. "No, not personally. Have you ever been threatened with eviction or faced unexpected rent increases?" "Well, no," he admitted. Maya stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Are you aware that Mr. Reynolds owns multiple properties under different business names?" The witness shifted in his seat. I've heard rumors." Maya offered a faint, knowing smile. "Rumors can be telling, can't they?" "No further questions, Your Honor." As the day wore on, the defense's case began to unravel. Witnesses offered little more than vague praise for Reynolds, and none could refute the mounting evidence against him. By the afternoon, it was clear Mr. Cole was running out of strategies. When it was Maya's turn to deliver her final argument, she stood with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and resolute, "this case is about more than just my client. It's about standing up to those who abuse their power to exploit others. Mr. Reynolds' arrest and the evidence we've presented leave no doubt about his actions. This countersuit is a desperate attempt to deflect blame, and it has no basis in truth." She turned to Teresa, who sat nervously at the plaintiff's table. "Miss Carter is a hard-working mother who has done nothing wrong. She deserves justice, and this court has the power to deliver it." Maya returned to her seat, catching a glimpse of Mr. Cole. His shoulders were slumped, and he avoided her gaze, his earlier confidence shattered. The judge took a long moment to review his notes before addressing the court. "Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the countersuit lacks merit. This court dismisses the countersuit with prejudice and will proceed with the original case." A wave of relief washed over Maya and Teresa. The countersuit was officially dead, and the path to victory seemed clearer than ever. But just as the courtroom began to empty, a bailiff approached Maya with a sealed envelope. "This was just delivered for you," he said. Maya opened it carefully, her heart pounding as she read the contents. It was a subpoena. Reynolds' legal team had filed a motion to introduce new evidence, and the hearing was set for the next day. Her relief was short-lived. The fight was far from over. Maya's heart sank as she read the subpoena. New evidence? She muttered, her mind already racing with questions. What could Reynolds' team possibly have left to present? And how? How could they have managed it with Reynolds behind bars? Teresa, who had been basking in the judge's dismissal of the countersuit, noticed Maya's expression shift. What is it? She asked nervously. Maya handed her the document. They're filing a motion to introduce new evidence. We have a hearing tomorrow. Teresa's face paled. New evidence? What else can they throw at us? Maya put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Whatever it is, we'll be ready. This is just another desperate attempt to stall. That evening, Maya returned home and immediately called Aaron. She explained the situation, and he was just as baffled as she was. New evidence? That's a bold move considering the mess they're in, Aaron said, typing furiously on his laptop. They've got to be banking on something big or they're bluffing. Either way, we can't take chances, Maya replied. I need you to dig deeper into Reynolds' legal team. See if they've been working with anyone new, especially since his arrest. I'm on it, Aaron said. I'll let you know what I find. The next morning, Maya walked into the courtroom with her head held high, even as uncertainty gnawed at her. Teresa sat beside her, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. The room buzzed with anticipation, reporters and spectators eager to see what this latest twist would bring. Judge Patterson entered, his face unreadable. This court is now in session. Mr. Cole, you've requested to introduce new evidence. Please explain its relevance. Mr. Cole stood, holding a manila folder. His confidence seemed restored, and that worried Maya. Your Honor, this evidence directly challenges the plaintiff's claims of financial hardship and speaks to her credibility. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Patterson opened it, his expression neutral as he examined the contents. Miss Brooks, the judge said, have you had the opportunity to review this evidence? No, Your Honor, Maya replied. This is the first time we're seeing it. Very well, the judge said. You'll have the chance to respond after Mr. Cole presents his case. Maya braced herself as Mr. Cole addressed the court. Your Honor, these are signed affidavits from multiple witnesses who claim to have seen Miss Carter engaging in unreported business activities, including operating a cash-only daycare service from her apartment. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Teresa's face went white, and she turned to Maya, shaking her head. That's not true, she whispered. I don't know what they're talking about. Maya nodded, her mind already working to counter the claim. Don't worry, she whispered back. We can handle this. Mr. Cole continued presenting the affidavits and photos that purported to show parents dropping off children at Teresa's apartment. The defense argued that this income undermined her claims of financial hardship and raised questions about her credibility. When it was Maya's turn to cross-examine, she approached the bench with her usual calm. Your Honor, may I examine these affidavits? The judge nodded, and the bailiff handed her copies of the documents. Maya scanned them quickly, noting discrepancies in the signatures and the vague language used by the witnesses. Mr. Cole, she began, can you confirm the identities of these witnesses and whether they've been deposed? Mr. Cole hesitated. They have not been deposed yet, but their affidavits are signed and notarized. Maya smiled faintly. Notarized does not equal credible. Without depositions, we have no way of verifying the authenticity of these claims. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I request that these witnesses be made available for depositions before this evidence is admitted. The judge nodded. That's a reasonable request. Mr. Cole, arrange for your witnesses to be deposed by the end of the week. Until then, this evidence will not be considered. After the hearing, Maya and Teresa left the courthouse, the weight of the new allegations hanging over them. As they walked to the car, Teresa finally broke down. Maya, what if they believe this? She said, tears streaming down her face. I don't even know these people. How can I prove they're lying? Maya hugged her tightly. We'll prove it, Teresa. I promise. This is just another one of their games, and we're going to expose it. That evening, Aaron called with an update. Maya, I found something interesting. One of the witnesses who signed those affidavits is connected to a company that has ties to Reynolds Properties. Maya's eyes narrowed. You mean she's on his payroll? Not directly, Aaron clarified, but she worked for a property management firm that oversees some of his buildings. It's enough to raise questions about her impartiality. Maya nodded, a plan forming in her mind. That's exactly what we need. Can you gather more details? Already on it, Aaron said. And get this, 2 of the other witnesses have connections to Harmony Solutions. I'm sending you everything now. The judge took a long moment to review his notes before addressing the court. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the counter-suit lacks merit. This court dismisses the counter-suit with prejudice and will proceed with the original case. A wave of relief washed over Maya and Teresa. The counter-suit was officially dead, and the path to victory seemed clearer than ever. But just as the courtroom began to empty, a bailiff approached Maya with a sealed envelope. This was just delivered for you, he said. Maya opened it carefully, her heart pounding as she read the contents. It was a subpoena. Reynolds' legal team had filed a motion to introduce new evidence, and the hearing was set for the next day. Her relief was short-lived. The fight was far from over. Maya's heart sank as she read the subpoena. New evidence? She muttered, her mind already racing with questions. What could Reynolds' team possibly have left to present? And how? How could they have managed it with Reynolds behind bars? Teresa, who had been basking in the judge's dismissal of the countersuit, noticed Maya's expression shift. What is it? She asked nervously. Maya handed her the document. They're filing a motion to introduce new evidence. We have a hearing tomorrow. Teresa's face paled. New evidence? What else can they throw at us? Maya put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Whatever it is, we'll be ready. This is just another desperate attempt to stall. That evening, Maya returned home and immediately called Aaron. She explained the situation, and he was just as baffled as she was. New evidence? That's a bold move considering the mess they're in, Aaron said, typing furiously on his laptop. They've got to be banking on something big or they're bluffing. Either way, we can't take chances, Maya replied. I need you to dig deeper into Reynolds' legal team. See if they've been working with anyone new, especially since his arrest. I'm on it, Aaron said. I'll let you know what I find. The next morning, Maya walked into the courtroom with her head held high, even as uncertainty gnawed at her. Teresa sat beside her, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. The room buzzed with anticipation, reporters and spectators eager to see what this latest twist would bring. Judge Patterson entered, his face unreadable. This court is now in session. Mr. Cole, you've requested to introduce new evidence. Please explain its relevance. Mr. Cole stood, holding a manila folder. His confidence seemed restored, and that worried Maya. Your Honor, this evidence directly challenges the plaintiff's claims of financial hardship and speaks to her credibility. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Patterson opened it, his expression neutral as he examined the contents. Miss Brooks, the judge said, have you had the opportunity to review this evidence? No, Your Honor, Maya replied. This is the first time we're seeing it. Very well, the judge said. You'll have the chance to respond after Mr. Cole presents his case. Maya braced herself as Mr. Cole addressed the court. Your Honor, these are signed affidavits from multiple witnesses who claim to have seen Miss Carter engaging in unreported business activities, including operating a cash-only daycare service from her apartment. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Teresa's face went white, and she turned to Maya, shaking her head. That's not true, she whispered. I don't know what they're talking about. Maya nodded, her mind already working to counter the claim. Don't worry, she whispered back. We can handle this. Mr. Cole continued presenting the affidavits and photos that purported to show parents dropping off children at Teresa's apartment. The defense argued that this income undermined her claims of financial hardship and raised questions about her credibility. When it was Maya's turn to cross-examine, she approached the bench with her usual calm. Your Honor, may I examine these affidavits? The judge nodded, and the bailiff handed her copies of the documents. Maya scanned them quickly, noting discrepancies in the signatures, and the vague language used by the witnesses. "Mr. Cole," she began, "can you confirm the identities of these witnesses and whether they've been deposed?" Mr. Cole hesitated. "They have not been deposed yet, but their affidavits are signed and notarized." Maya smiled faintly. "Notarized does not equal credible. Without depositions, we have no way of verifying the authenticity of these claims." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request that these witnesses be made available for depositions before this evidence is admitted." The judge nodded. "That's a reasonable request. Mr. Cole, arrange for your witnesses to be deposed by the end of the week. Until then, this evidence will not be considered." After the hearing, Maya and Teresa left the courthouse, the weight of the new allegations hanging over them. As they walked to the car, Teresa finally broke down. "Maya, what if they believe this?" she said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't even know these people. How can I prove they're lying?" Maya hugged her tightly. "We'll prove it, Teresa. I promise. This is just another one of their games, and we're going to expose it." That evening, Aaron called with an update. "Maya, I found something interesting. One of the witnesses who signed those affidavits is connected to a company that has ties to Reynolds Properties." Maya's eyes narrowed. "You mean she's on his payroll?" "Not directly," Aaron clarified, "but she worked for a property management firm that oversees some of his buildings. It's enough to raise questions about her impartiality." Maya nodded, a plan forming in her mind. "That's exactly what we need. Can you gather more details?" "Already on it," Aaron said. "And get this, 2 of the other witnesses have connections to Harmony Solutions. I'm sending you everything now." The next morning, Maya prepared her deposition strategy. When the witnesses were called in, she systematically dismantled their credibility, presenting Aaron's findings and exposing their ties to Reynolds. Under pressure, one witness admitted she had been paid to sign the affidavit, while another confessed she had unknowingly signed a petition. By the end of the depositions, the new evidence was proven to be another fabrication. Maya smiled for the first time all day. "Aaron, you're a lifesaver." The next morning, Maya prepared her deposition strategy. When the witnesses were called in, she systematically dismantled their credibility. She presented Aaron's findings showing their ties to Reynolds and questioned their motivations for coming forward. One witness, visibly nervous, admitted under pressure that she had been paid to sign the affidavit. Another claimed to have no knowledge of the allegations, saying she had been told she was signing a petition about tenant rights. By the end of the depositions, it was clear that the new evidence was yet another fabrication. Maya presented her findings to Judge Patterson, who was visibly unimpressed with the defense's tactics. "Mr. Cole," the judge said sternly, "this court has had enough of these baseless distractions. The evidence you've presented is inadmissible, and I'm considering sanctions against your client for attempting to mislead this court." Maya and Teresa exchanged relieved glances, but the victory was bittersweet. The lengths Reynolds' team was willing to go made it clear that they weren't done fighting yet. As the hearing adjourned, Maya stepped outside into the crisp air, her resolve stronger than ever. But as she approached her car, a man in a dark suit stepped out of the shadows. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone icy, "a word of advice, back off. You don't know who you're dealing with." Maya stared at him, her pulse quickening, but her voice didn't waver. "If that's a threat, you'll need to do better because I'm not going anywhere." The man in the dark suit gave Maya a chilling smile, his eyes narrowing. "Suit yourself," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded parking lot. Teresa, who had just exited the courthouse, hurried over to Maya. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Maya replied, her eyes scanning the area, "but it's clear Reynolds' team isn't just playing dirty. They're escalating." Teresa's face was pale. "Maya, this is getting dangerous. Maybe we should." "No," Maya interrupted firmly. "That's exactly what they want. If we back down now, they win. And they'll keep doing this to other people." Teresa nodded reluctantly, but the fear in her eyes remained. That evening, Maya sat at her desk replaying the encounter in her mind. The man's tone, his confident stride, and the vague but pointed threat. It all felt calculated. She called Aaron, hoping he could shed some light on the situation. "Hey, Maya," Aaron answered. "What's up?" She recounted the parking lot incident, describing the man in detail. "I don't know who he is, but he's clearly connected to Reynolds or his team. Can you look into anyone new they might have hired?" Aaron sighed. "It's possible they've brought in private investigators or consultants. I'll dig around and see what I can find." "Thanks, Aaron," Maya said, "and let me know if anything looks off. I've got a feeling this isn't over." The next morning, Maya arrived at the courthouse early, determined to maintain control of the case. To her surprise, Judge Patterson called her into chambers before the session began. "Miss Brooks," he said, his expression unusually grave, "I've received a letter from Mr. Reynolds' attorney requesting to delay the proceedings indefinitely, citing his client's legal troubles and inability to participate." Maya's brow furrowed. "Your Honor, this is another stalling tactic. The defense has repeatedly tried to derail this case. Granting them an indefinite delay would set a dangerous precedent." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I agree that the request is suspect, but the court must balance fairness with efficiency. Do you have a proposal for how we should proceed?" Maya took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I request that the case move forward without further delays. If Mr. Reynolds is unavailable, his legal team can represent him based on the evidence already submitted." Judge Patterson leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "Very well. I'll deny the defense's request for an indefinite delay and set a final hearing date. Be prepared to present closing arguments next week." The announcement sent shockwaves through the courtroom. When the session resumed, Mr. Cole, clearly unprepared for this development, scrambled to object, but the judge held firm. "This case has dragged on long enough," Judge Patterson declared. "Both sides will present closing arguments next week, and this court will issue a ruling." After court adjourned, Teresa turned to Maya, her voice filled with a mix of relief and anxiety. "So this is it? It's almost over." Maya nodded. "Almost. But we need to make sure our closing argument is airtight. This is our chance to seal the deal." That evening, Aaron called with an update. "Maya, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "I found out who that guy in the parking lot was. His name is Lucas Harper, and he's a private investigator with a reputation for doing questionable work." "Questionable how?" Maya asked, her stomach tightening. "Harassment, intimidation, planting evidence, you name it. He's been linked to several high-profile cases where the opposition suddenly dropped out after his involvement." Maya exhaled sharply. "So they're trying to scare us into quitting." "Exactly," Aaron said. "But here's the kicker. Harper is tied to another one of Reynolds' shell companies. They're paying him directly." Maya's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly the kind of pattern we need to show the judge. Can you send me everything you have on Harper?" "Already on its way," Aaron replied. "Just be careful, Maya. This guy doesn't play by the rules." The next morning, Maya received a call from a local journalist. "Maya Brooks," the voice on the other end said. "I'm Tyler Jackson with the Tribune. I'd love to do a feature on you. Highlight your work on the Reynolds case and what it means for tenant rights." Maya hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight and didn't particularly enjoy the attention. But she realized that sharing the story could inspire others to stand up for themselves. "Okay," she said cautiously, "but only if the focus stays on the case and the impact on tenants like Teresa." "Absolutely," Tyler agreed. "Let's schedule an interview later this week." The article went live, and it was more than Maya expected. The headline read, "Tenant Turn Takes Down Corrupt Landlord. Sparks Hope for Tenants Everywhere." It detailed the trial, the tactics Reynolds had used, and Maya's unrelenting fight for justice. The response was overwhelming. Maya received dozens of emails and messages from people across the country, many sharing their own stories of housing injustice. One email in particular stood out. "Dear Miss Brooks, my name is Laura Gonzalez. I've been fighting a similar battle with my landlord for over a year. Your story gave me the courage to keep going. I was wondering if you'd be willing to advise me on my case. I can't afford a lawyer, but I could really use your help." Maya stared at the email, her mind racing. She wanted to help, but she was just one person. How could she take on more cases while still keeping up with her studies and personal life? "Grandma," she said later that evening, "people are asking for my help. I want to do more, but I don't know how." Clara sat beside her, her expression wise and calm. "You don't have to do it alone, Maya. There are people out there who share your passion. Maybe it's time to build something bigger." Maya spent the next few weeks brainstorming ways to expand her impact. She reached out to local lawyers, community activists, and nonprofit organizations focused on housing rights. Slowly but surely, a plan began to take shape. A grassroots initiative that would provide free legal aid to tenants facing eviction and exploitation. She called it the Justice Collective. Aaron jumped on board immediately, offering to handle the tech side of things. "We'll set up a website, social media, everything," he said excitedly. "This could really blow up." Teresa volunteered as well, eager to give back after everything she'd been through. "You saved me, Maya," she said. "The least I can do is help you save others." Meanwhile, the fallout from Reynolds' arrest continued. News reports revealed that he was facing additional charges, including tax evasion and racketeering. Several of his properties were seized by the authorities, and tenants who had been wrongfully evicted began to speak out. But not everyone was happy about Maya's growing influence. One evening, as she worked late at the new Justice Collective office, a small donated space in a community center, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Brooks," the voice on the other end said, low and menacing. "You think you've won, but you don't understand how deep this goes. Walk away while you still can." Maya's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" The caller chuckled darkly. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows how to make problems disappear. Consider this your last warning." The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, her heart pounding. She immediately called Aaron and told him about the threat. "That's insane," Aaron said. "We need to report this to the police." Maya hesitated. "And say what?" "That some anonymous caller told me to stop helping people? Without proof, they won't do anything." Still, Aaron insisted, "You shouldn't take this lightly. You're getting under someone's skin, and they're scared of what you're building." Maya took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "Then I must be doing something right." As the Justice Collective gained traction, more stories came to light. Families who had been forced out of their homes, landlords who manipulated leases, and tenants who felt powerless. The movement began to grow, with volunteers stepping up to support the cause. But the threats didn't stop. Maya started noticing strange cars parked near her house, and once she found a threatening note taped to her door. "Quit while you can." One evening, as she was leaving the office, she spotted Lucas Harper waiting outside. He leaned casually against a lamp post, his smirk as infuriating as ever. "You've made quite a name for yourself," he said as she approached. "But you're poking at things that don't like to be poked." Maya squared her shoulders, refusing to show fear. "I'm not afraid of you." Harper chuckled. "Maybe you should be. People like me, we don't lose." "Neither do I." Maya shot back, brushing past him. The threats only fueled her determination. By the end of the year, the Justice Collective had helped dozens of families avoid eviction and exposed several unethical landlords. Maya's story continued to spread, inspiring others to fight back against injustice. But Maya knew the fight wasn't over. The deeper she dug, the more corruption she uncovered. And as the movement grew, so did the enemies she made. Still, she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The Justice Collective's growth was unprecedented. In less than a year, Maya and her team had transformed a small initiative into a powerful force, uncovering systemic corruption in housing laws and holding landlords accountable. Yet with every victory, the threats against Maya escalated. Anonymous letters, late-night phone calls, and the ever-present shadow of Lucas Harper reminded her that she was fighting a battle that stretched far beyond her initial case. One evening, after wrapping up a seminar at a local community center, Maya received an urgent call from Aaron. "Maya, we've got a problem," Aaron said, his voice tense. "I've been tracking some unusual activity tied to Reynolds' old network. There's a massive real estate deal happening tomorrow. It involves one of his shell companies, Harmony Solutions, and a group of investors with a shady track record." Maya frowned. "What's the deal?" "They're planning to buy up a block of low-income housing, evict everyone, and flip it into luxury condos. It's a textbook gentrification scheme, and they're using Reynolds' playbook. If this goes through, dozens of families will be displaced. Maya's stomach twisted. Do we have enough evidence to stop it? Not yet, Aaron admitted. But I found out where the signing is happening. If we can disrupt the meeting and expose their plans, we might be able to stop it. The next morning, Maya, Aaron, and Teresa arrived at the downtown office building where the meeting was scheduled to take place. Armed with documents Aaron had uncovered, they were ready to confront the investors and reveal the truth. As they entered the building, Maya spotted Lucas Harper leaning against a wall near the elevator. He smirked when he saw her. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he said, "but you're way out of your league this time." Maya stepped closer, her voice cold. "Maybe. Or maybe you and your friends are finally about to lose." Harper chuckled. "Good luck. You'll need it." Maya ignored him and headed to the conference room where the deal was set to be signed. Through the glass walls, she could see a group of men in suits gathered around a table, documents spread out before them. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room fell silent as the investors turned to look at her. "Can we help you?" one of them asked, his tone laced with irritation. Maya held up a folder. "I'm here to stop you from destroying people's lives." The men exchanged amused glances, but Maya pressed on. She placed copies of Aaron's findings on the table and began explaining how the deal relied on fraudulent practices. As she spoke, their smirks faded. "This deal isn't just unethical. It's illegal," Maya said. "And if you move forward with it, we'll make sure the world knows exactly what you're doing." The tension in the room was thick. One of the investors, clearly rattled, muttered, "We need to discuss this privately." Another, less shaken, leaned forward. "You have no authority here, kid. Get out before we call security." Maya stood her ground. "You can call security if you want, but the evidence is already on its way to the media and the Attorney General's office. This meeting is over." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the older investors sighed and stood up. "She's right. We can't take this risk. We're pulling out." The others followed suit, some grumbling, others glaring at Maya as they filed out of the room. Lucas Harper appeared in the doorway, watching with a mixture of annoyance and admiration. "You really don't quit," he said. Maya turned to him, her voice steady. "Not when people's lives are at stake." Harper's smirk faltered for the first time. He gave her a small nod, almost respectful, before walking away. The story of Maya's showdown at the investor meeting spread quickly, solidifying her reputation as a fearless advocate for justice. The Justice Collective received an outpouring of support, with donations and volunteers flooding in. The block of housing Maya had saved became a symbol of hope, and tenants began organizing their own efforts to protect their rights. But Maya knew the fight was far from over. She had learned that the system was deeply flawed, and for every landlord like Reynolds or investor scheme she exposed, there were more waiting in the shadows. One evening, as she sat with Clara and Teresa, Maya reflected on the journey so far. "It feels like we're just scratching the surface," she said. "There's so much more to do." Clara smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You've already made a difference, Maya, and you're inspiring others to stand up too. That's how real change begins." Teresa nodded. "You gave me my life back. You're doing more than just fighting cases. You're giving people hope." Maya smiled, a sense of purpose washing over her. "Then I guess we keep going." Years later, Maya Brooks would go on to become a renowned attorney and activist, leading a nationwide movement for tenant rights and housing reform. The Justice Collective expanded into a powerful organization, helping thousands of families and rewriting laws to protect the vulnerable. And though the threats never fully disappeared, Maya never wavered. She had learned that the fight for justice was never easy, but it was always worth it. Because for every person like Teresa Carter who found their voice, the world became a little brighter. Maya's story became a beacon, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person could make a difference, and that the fight for justice was always worth fighting. If Maya's story has inspired you, even just a little, then now is the time to take action. Hit that like button, because every click helps spread this powerful message of courage and justice. Subscribe to the channel, not just to support our work, but but to become part of a community that believes in standing up for what's right. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you think, share your thoughts, or even your own experiences. And here's a question for you. If you were in Maya's shoes, would you have the strength to keep fighting? Your support isn't just about numbers. It's about amplifying voices like Maya's and showing the world that one person can make a difference. So go ahead, subscribe, and join us in this fight for justice. Because together, we are stronger.